Derek, you've got a light problem again.
What are we going to do without Courtney?
All of you guys, hopefully this is better. Did I get
Yeah, it's
it?
better. It's better.
Is Madam Vice Chair on with us?
Almost.
Because if she is,
Live.
okay. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman.
I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone to the House Economic Matters Committee. Today is Wednesday, January 20th, 2021. A great day, not only here in Annapolis, but also our country as well, as we continue our tradition. We have 4 bills before us today. House Bill 328, which Delegate Kerr would lead off with us. House Bill 356, Delegate Chi will be next. House Bill 106, Delegate Wilson. And then we will close out with House Bill 41 with Delegate Smith. So with that, if I can get Delegate Kerr up before us to get us started.
I'm ready, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
Well, good afternoon, Chairman Davis and members of the committee. I am Delegate Ken Kerr with House Bill 328, which concerns abandoned property, notices, and records. You may recall that you heard this bill last March 6th. So under Maryland law, Title 17-301, property valued at $100 or more and held by banking or financial organizations is presumed abandoned if the depositor has been notified by first-class mail at the depositor's last known address. The fact that the property will be considered abandoned if there's no response within 30 days. The important part here is first-class mail. I don't know about you, but I'm still getting Christmas cards mailed longer than 30 days ago. But even under ideal circumstances, first-class mail is not always sufficient notice, especially where high-value assets, which are not abandoned, but deposited in financial institutions for safekeeping until they're needed for a future date. So once again, the bank or financial institution in possession of the presumed abandoned property shall send a written notice by first-class mail to the apparent owner of the presumed abandoned property to the owner's last known address. The property is considered abandoned unless the owner responds within 30 days. And this notice starts when the letter is mailed. This issue came to my attention when Rick Rudinger, a constituent in my district, contacted me regarding this practice and how it affected him and his wife and their retirement savings. He said one of his mutual funds was determined abandoned and turned over to the state of Maryland without him knowing. The financial firm said this was done because he had not contacted the financial institution or done anything with the mutual fund for 3 years. But like we encourage people to do, Mr. Rudinger, a small business owner, was saving for his retirement. This account with $100,000 on deposit was part of his retirement plans. And he planned for this money to be used 15 or 20 years from now and considered it safe in the hands of the financial institution where he had placed it. My constituent was not aware, as I imagine most of us are not, that he needed to remain in contact with the holder of this mutual fund. The financial institution sent him a letter through first-class mail. Now, there was a time when a letter from a bank was a rare and important communication, you know, a monthly statement, tax filing document, or even an overdraft notice. But today, not so much. We receive weekly, even daily unsolicited correspondence from our banks for new investment opportunities, credit cards, equity loans, essentially junk mail. So these banks and financial institutions frequently send marketing material in envelopes identical to or very similar to monthly statements. The Rudingers had signed up for electronic statements to their accounts, so they weren't expecting to be contacted by mail at all. They apparently threw the notice away. It wasn't until he was preparing his income tax return that he noticed an account was missing. He was eventually able to recover the money, but not before paying capital gains of $12,000 on an account he had not intended to even touch for 15 or 20 years. Same thing happened to them again, but they were fortunate enough this time to open a letter that informed them a second account was about to be sold to the state within 3 days. I too have had this experience with an account that was holding long-term savings. No deposits were made for 3 years and the account was about to be turned over to the state. This is done even though we had other active accounts at the same bank. We also use online banking and have no expectation of being contacted by first-class mail. So a single letter, just like those sent to solicit business, sent in first-class mail informing a customer an account is about to be turned over to the state, is insufficient notice. When I presented this bill to you last session, it required that owners of accounts of property over $10,000, which were about to be determined abandoned, be notified by certified mail return receipt. The Attorney General's Office of Consumer Protection sent a letter of recommendation that this threshold be lowered from $10,000 to $1,000. This committee last year took that suggestion and amended the bill to $1,000. It passed out of ECM with a vote of 22-1 and went on to pass the House 132-0. In the Senate hearing, representatives from the Maryland Banking Association requested that the bill be restored to its original posture of $10,000. Senate Finance Committee agreed and amended the bill back to $10,000. It went on to pass the Senate 45-0 with the amendment and returned to the House on the final day of our shortened session and was not considered before sine die. So when I reintroduced the bill this year, I compromised, setting the minimum for enhanced notification at $5,000. My thinking is that if we were able to take this bill to conference committee last year, that's where we would have ended up. So in the spirit of compromise, I arrived at that number. And I spoke with Bob Enton, whom you'll hear from shortly, on Monday. His clients remain committed to that 10,000 number, as he will explain to you. My desire is to determine what is that magic number that will protect consumers and not cause undue burden on financial institutions that hold these assets in question. With your help, I know we can arrive at that number and reach a favorable report. I thank you.
Any questions of Delegate Kerr? Seeing none. Thank you very much. Can I go with Mindy Lehman of the Bankers Association, please?
If it pleases the chair, could we lead off with Mr. Enton?
He's unfavorable.
No, I intended to sign up favorable with amendments as well, Mr. Chairman. I apologize.
Okay. All right then. Robert Enton.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. Robert Enton on behalf of the Maryland Bankers Association. I did have a good conversation with the sponsor, and I think last year, frankly, the bill came out of finance, and I waited outside the sponsor's door at about 7:30 that morning, and as the clock was ticking on the session, he's laughing because he knows that's correct. And we talked about it, and he was comfortable, for the finance committee then at that time to reduce the amount back to its original introduction. I watched the bill hearing last night from last year. There were no witnesses who actually testified in support of the bill. Frankly, Maryland Bankers Association was fine with the bill as introduced, had no problems with it whatsoever. And the first thing I knew was, it was out of the committee and on the floor. We weren't, tracking it maybe as closely as we should have, but we didn't know it was going to be voted on. And we obviously didn't know it was going to be amended. And we didn't testify against it because we didn't have a problem with it. So, lessons learned after 35 years of doing this, I guess you have to pay more attention than I did on this bill. However, having said that, I just would like to point out that the first class mail, you have a better chance of receiving first class mail than you have of receiving certified mail return receipt requested, because if nobody's home, that's not going to be delivered and you have to go to the post office and pick it up, and many people don't do that. Lesson learned, I guess, you got to open the mail from your financial institution, from your bank, and this was a mutual fund. I assume the notice didn't come from a bank. It came from a mutual fund company. Having, said that, I would also just like to point out that the cost of a stamp is 55 cents. The cost of certified mail return requested is $6.10. So that's a significant increase in the cost of doing this, plus the labor of doing it. I told Delegate Kerr that we would be happy to work with him and work with the committee and try to come up with a compromise on this bill. But I think, if the bill went back to its original form, which Delegate Kerr was fine with when it was over in the Senate, we would actively support the bill, both in the House and on the Senate side. And if we could reach maybe a compromise number, but I really don't know. I'm trying to get information on how many more accounts this will information. I would think if you've got, $10,000 sitting there, people are going to pay attention to it, and they pay attention to what happened to it. So for all those reasons, we are favorable with amendments. I'd ask the committee if they could, give us some time to meet with Delegate Kerr and talk about it. Maybe we can come back with a compromise, but we were fine with the way the bill was introduced last year, and what the Senate did was put it back to its introduced form. So
Are you
with
saying
that,
the Senate screwed it up?
happy to answer any questions. Thank
Are
you.
you saying the Senate screwed up?
No, once in a while, hopefully not too much.
We feel the same way sometimes. Anyway, no, that's fine. That's fine. Are there any questions for Mr. Hinton?
I'm sorry?
Oh, no, I was just asking, does the committee have any questions for you?
Yeah, I got one, Chair. I think Delegate Lorig has one too.
All right, let me go with Delegate Charkoudian and then Delegate Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just trying to make sure I understand. You're saying that you think that if somebody trusts a bank with, let's say, $2,000 of my money, the bank can't come up with $6 to let me know they're about to turn it into the state? Is that like $6 is too much to, after whatever the bank might have earned? I mean, you just said that you think it's a hardship if you have to do the return receipt on something under 10,000, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so Delegate, let me just say that, once again, I mean, I don't know how many times we would have to do this. Obviously, if we had to do it 5 times a year, it's not a big deal. If we have to do it 1,000 times a year or 10,000 times a year, then it is. And part of my point is that my experience as an attorney, there are lots of notices under Maryland law that have to be sent, certified mail return receipt requested. And my experience, particularly, as a young attorney, when I handled small claims litigation, was that our clients, upon our advice, would send the notices by first class mail and certified mail, because most of the time certified mail never got picked up. I just think it's a waste of time and a waste of effort to do that. I think first class mail is fine. I think people that have large amounts in bank accounts are going to keep track of them and not let them go by the wayside. So that's our position.
Well, so would you support an amendment to make it first class and certified?
I just don't think the certified is necessary, not at all. But I'll live with the certified if the amount is lower.
I think the concern is on the one hand, you're thinking about if the banks and what would happen if thousands of times a year they had to send a certified mail. My concern is that thousands of times a year, some of our constituents who might not have a lot of money, so might not have $10,000 savings accounts, but might have $3,000 savings accounts that are being lost to the state without them even knowing that. I'm not sure how somebody would know that if they put some money away, as people are generally advised to do, right? Save money. And we know that far too many people don't even have, $500 in an account, can't weather a storm. But let's just say that you have people who have managed to sock away $3,000, $5,000, and you're saying that it's too much of a burden to make sure that they are contacted. And my concern is that there's too many people who might be losing a couple $1,000s, which would be very significant to them in this process. And I'm hearing you say it's too much work for the bank with whom they've entrusted that money if they have to do it several thousand times a year.
I'm saying 2 things. I'm saying that, number one, I've represented the Maryland Bankers Association for 35 years. And last year was the first time any member of the Maryland General Assembly has ever said to the Maryland Bankers Association or to me that there was a problem with the notices under this statute. Okay. Number two, I'm saying that I think consumers are better off in this current system of first-class mail. It works and it is good. I think there's a better chance they'll get the notice. Number three is I think if you get a notice from your bank, you know, most people will open it up and see what it says. Particularly it's from your bank. If I get a notice from, I'll be honest, I'm a Bank of America customer. If I get a notice from a different bank, I may look at it and say, yeah, this is an advertisement. If I get a notice in the mail from Bank of America, I guarantee I'm going to open it up.
That's good. I'm glad you opened your mail. I guess my concern is how do we protect consumers in this state, and especially consumers who might be close to the edge where losing $3,000 would be massive. And it seems to me that it's not too much of a burden to ask banks to work with consumers to make sure that they don't inadvertently lose that money when the banks are benefiting over the years from having those deposits with them. And that's not really a question. Isn't that so? But you don't need to answer, Bob. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Howard.
Yeah, so Bob, one of your concerns is the amount that the $6 for the certified mail thousands of times a year. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, we were fine once again with the bill as it was introduced because, you know, we thought, okay, that's a lot of money. And if we have to take an extra step, you know, for that amount, it's not going to be burdensome. It was fine with us.
Any idea in 2019 what banks in this country took in just overdraft fees? Just overdraft fees.
No, I have no idea.
$11 billion. $11 billion in just overdraft fees. Any idea the projected amount of overdraft fees in 2020? I'll answer.
No idea.
$30 billion. $30 billion in just overdraft fees in banks throughout this country. $6 certified mail. I don't like to say this often, but I have to agree with Delegate Charkoudian on this one. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Wow.
Delegate Fisher.
I have no question. Thank you.
Okay.
I have a question.
Is there anyone else?
Mr. Chair.
Delegate Walker.
Thank you. And I saw Delegate Queen's hand, so I don't know if you're seeing her as well. The question is, so Mr. N, it seems like, try to figure out, you're okay with the bill if the amount is at the higher amount, but if you lower the amount, then the dollar amount, then you're not okay with the bill, just to clarify, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's our position. And we, you know, I appreciate Delegate Kerr introducing the bill at $5,000. We think that's much more reasonable than, you know, and for us than what was introduced and what passed out of the committee last year. I'd like to, you know, talk to him and talk to my client and, you know, see what we can do with the amount.
So for the record, you're supporting at 5,000, not that 10,000 came out. Are you supporting at 5,000?
Right now, we would like to see it lower, but we're happy to continue to discuss. So I see you shaking your head. I know that you probably think 5,000 is not a bad number. I
actually think 1,000 is a better number. It's a hard-earned money, but I just want to be clear. So you're saying at 5,000, you are supporting.
No, I'm saying 5,000. I want to discuss it some more with Delegate Kerr, my client, if I could. This, you know, this is bill we saw for the first time, last week on Wednesday and the hearings today. So I just hope that we can, you know, talk to him and work something out on it.
I mean, I remember we discussed this bill last year, and I'm kind of, what was the Senate, if you can answer, what was the Senate's reason for taking it up to $10,000?
I think that the Senate thought that that was a reasonable amount. And frankly, Delegate Kerr came, and correct me if I'm wrong, Delegate Kerr, but you supported that change in the bill at that time. And I understand you wanted to get the bill through, the clock was ticking. But that's, you know, there was no opposition in the Senate to putting it back to where the bill was originally.
All right, thank you.
Delegate Queen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Eden, I just want to clarify, so some of what Delegate Walker mentioned. So 5,000 you're okay with, you want to talk to your clients about. Where are you getting the premise that we'd be sending these letters out, 1,000 of them a year? Because I thought the rule was
I don't know how many we're sending. That's the problem.
1,000 per account, or are you talking about one?
No. I don't know. It's funny. I put a call into the comptroller's office today and haven't gotten a response to try to find out how many, accounts are sheeted to the state. I just don't really know. I think my point is that if we're, I just don't know how many it would be, but it seems to me to go from to establish a threshold of everything that's under $10,000 has to go out and has to go by certified mail, when the current threshold is $100. And other than the constituent complaint that Delegate Kerr got, I've never heard, and I don't think anybody on the committee has ever heard a complaint about this issue.
I think it's because people didn't know. Until he mentioned that, I was like, if I have a mutual fund, I'm expected to put that money away. I'm not checking that money every year. I'm assuming I leave it there and sit until, or add to it occasionally if I'm adding to it every month or every year. But you don't look for that. And
They do have to send you a notice, number one. It's not by certified mail, it's by first class mail. I think personally, in my experience, you have a better shot of getting that maybe than you do certified, because if you're not home when the certified mail comes, you're not going to get it. Number
true,
one.
you have to go. You have to go to the post office to get it. But
Exactly.
what certified mail does, it tells
Exactly.
you, hey, something's important. I need to look at, and
Right.
that's the importance of it. So
Right.
So
Yeah.
you're
The
just
other
talking
thing I
about
would say is, if you want to amend the bill to make it only apply to mutual funds, that's fine with the Maryland Bankers Association. I mean, there's no evidence that the banks are not doing a good job with this. It's not like other, there are any other witnesses on the bill whatsoever. Just us.
So the only way we would know, well, we would know from the controller's office how many times we're looking at.
Right. And I'm trying to find that out.
Okay, and we would have a sense of how many are coming in at 100 versus 1,000 versus.
I think they could tell us that, yeah.
And so we
Although
can look at
I
those
guess when you
numbers.
send the notice, the other thing I don't know is how many times do we send the mail notice out and then we hear from the customer saying, wait a second, that's the money in my account. I mean, I would think it's kind of rare that somebody would have, it takes 3 years that somebody would have this money sitting in a bank account, okay? Whether it's a checking account or a savings account, and have never touched it for 3 years, as opposed to maybe I got, $10,000 in this mutual fund or that mutual fund, and I'm going to hold on to it, depending on the, what my needs are in the stock price. I don't want to, I don't want to have a capital gain. If you take your money out of your bank account, there is no capital gain. If you sell that mutual fund, there is a capital gain. So I think people hold on to them longer. That's why I think there may be a difference between what happens with banks and what happens with mutual funds.
Which is what the next question I'm trying to get to. So you would have a difference if we were talking about mutual funds versus a bank account.
Right. I wouldn't have any opposition whatsoever to that.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Any
Mr.
further-
Chairman.
Madam Vice Chair.
So, and I apologize that I was running late today. But I don't know, did Delegate Kerr in his Delegate Kerr, I'll ask you, in your testimony, this is based on your one constituent complaint? I guess what concerns me, is the lack of sort of any data as to what the problem is. Other than I appreciate that you had a constituent. I do remember that from last year. But, I don't know. I'm not satisfied that there is a big problem. And maybe the information from the comptroller will help, but I just don't know if perhaps you have additional data. The only written testimony is from the Consumer Protection Division of the AG's office, who actually says they support the intent of the bill, but they recommend the parameters should be amended to 100 to 1,000 for notice by first class mail and 1,000 or more for notice by certified mail, is what Mr. Sakamoto is recommending. So if you've got information about more data on sort of what the problem is, and and whether there's a, problem that would be addressed, that would be helpful.
Only that similar situation happened to me with account with much less money in it, just
Okay,
a few thousand. So if it happened to me, I think it's probably not an uncommon occurrence, and we see by the publication of the comptroller every year, all of the tens
yeah,
of
I look at that
thousands.
list too.
Yeah. So, but
All right, well, maybe, Mr. Renton, if you could get that information from the comptroller so we have an idea of how many accounts are affected by someone not getting notice, it would be helpful.
I certainly will do. As I said, I've reached out to them, and as soon as I hear back from them, I'll be in touch with committee and the staff.
And then one final question, as I indicated, apparently the Consumer Protection Division thinks that first-class mail for 100 to 1,000, certified mail for over 1,000. What is your position with reference to that recommendation?
Right. And can I just say, Delegate Dumais, that once again, I mean, when the Consumer Protection Division has a complaint against the bank, they pick up the phone and call the Maryland Bankers Association. We've never, ever, ever gotten a call from the Consumer Protection Division indicating that this was a problem.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? If not, thank you, Mr. Hinton. And now I'd like to go to
Hey, Chair.
Delegate Chi.
I have
Yeah,
a question.
Delegate Chi.
Delegate Chi.
Listening to the debate, it just occurs to me, can we find a compromise to say you will send first-class mail as the baseline operation? And if people don't respond by certain days, then you can follow up. Because if I were a business, this is how I would operate.
I'm not sure I understand, Delegate Key. We say that we send it by first class. If they respond, we're not going to sheet it to the state if we hear from them.
So what I'm saying is, instead of setting parameters according to the cash value, you can set parameters according to whether or not you need to follow up in terms of communication. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'd be happy to discuss that with you and try to think through it and how that would work.
If first-class mail works, then you don't need to send a follow-up mail by certified mail or whatever.
Yeah, I'd be happy to discuss that. Think about it. Once again, I just off the top of my head, I had to think about just exactly how that would work some. But if we can schedule a call, I can't come meet with you, right? Like, I'll be in Annapolis Thursday for the first time, which is unheard of for me. And I'd be happy to, if you want to schedule an appointment to come by in the afternoon to talk about it.
All right. All right. Thanks, Bob. Mindy Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, my name is Mindy Lehman. I'm the Senior Vice President of Government Relations for the Maryland Bankers Association. And we discussed this bill on Monday with our members, and Mr. Renton's testimony really covers our position on the bill. Just one element that we're looking forward to working with the bill sponsor on to get some greater clarity on, and this is really just a compliance piece, is the bill states that the record shall be sufficient to allow a person who is able to recover the abandoned property to establish a tax basis. And it's just the record keeping piece around establishing a tax basis that my members were not fully clear on what that meant. So we're just looking forward to some additional clarification on that particular piece. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lehman. Any questions for Ms. Lehman? Delegate Watson, your hand is up.
Yes, thank you. I just want to go back a second to the statement that, we don't really have any data and this really hasn't been a problem in the 30 years. I just want to caution us that that's not necessarily the standard on which we should judge this bill. From my perspective, you may not know about this because people that it's affecting may not know to call Consumer Protection, may not know to call the Bankers Association. And so I think we should just be really cautious that it may very well be a problem that we are not aware of. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions for Ms. Lehman or whatever? Seeing none, I don't think. Then I think that concludes the testimony on House Bill 328. And thank you very much, Delegate Kerr and witnesses. We are now going to move to Delegate Xi's bill. It's House Bill 356.
Greetings. It's great to be back to ECM to present my first bill back to ECM for session 2021. Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. It's also wonderful to see the peaceful transfer of power on this historical day for our country. I'm Delegate Lily Chi, and I'm here to present HB 356. HB 356 is a very simple bill that requires SDET, the State Department of Assessment and Taxation, to conduct an analysis and make recommendations about Maryland's business filing fees and to come up with a new filing fee structure in order to make Maryland more competitive with our neighboring jurisdictions in light of the changing market dynamics. This is a reintroduction of last year's amended bill. Thanks to this committee's work, this bill passed the House last year with very strong support, but of course, as we all know, due to the early sunny day, it didn't have a chance to be voted on the side. This committee especially is very aware that business filing fees were burdensome even before the pandemic. And now it just looks even more outdated when our businesses are struggling to keep their lights on and we are asking them to pay $300 every year just for the privilege of doing business in Maryland. There's no surrounding jurisdictions that have this kind of policy with the same kind of frequency of annual filing and $300 a year. In the past years, many legislators have attempted to reduce the business filing fee burdens by different ways of carving out. But we believe rather than these piecemeal deals, and by the way, almost none of them succeeded but for one, which has to do with the state's retirement savings account. It would be a wise approach to ask SDET to do a comprehensive analysis and then come up with some recommendations of a new filing fee structure that would make us competitive and would be easier for them to administer. So essentially that's what this simple bill would do. And I would like to point out that SDET has been very receptive to the idea and it's ready to work. And also there is zero fiscal impact for this bill. So that I urge a very favorable report and would like to turn to my two witnesses who have signed up. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Price, did you want to go first?
Sure, thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and honorable members of the committee. My name is Sarah Price, and I'm here on behalf of the Maryland Retailers Association. First of all, I would like to thank Delegate Chi for sponsoring this bill and for working with us on legislation that would assist businesses that have been negatively impacted by the pandemic. We really appreciate your support of the business community. This bill would really help out with operating costs for small businesses in Maryland. Unfortunately, our state has historically had a negative reputation for its business environment. And in 2019, it was actually ranked in the bottom 5 states for the cost of doing business. Evaluating and adjusting our corporate filing fees in order to remain competitive with neighboring jurisdictions would make a really big difference for local businesses and for entrepreneurs that want to establish in Maryland. So thank you for your consideration, and we urge a favorable report on HB 356.
Thank you, Ms. Price. Ms. Swanson?
Yes, good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Tricia Swanson, and I am Vice President of Government Relations at the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this afternoon. It's funny, we didn't coordinate our remarks, but mine have a very similar theme to what we've heard from the delegate and the witness before me. So I won't repeat what they've said. I'll just say from the Chamber's perspective and working with particularly small businesses over the last 10 months, $300 is exceptionally meaningful as they try to navigate through this pandemic. And as we navigate out of the pandemic, a strong economy is more important than ever. And so by studying this fee, the state is moving towards that stronger economy, and a strong economy means a diverse economy. And so by studying and potentially changing this fee to be more economically competitive, you're not only signaling support for our imperative small business community, but you're really showing them that you're investing in them growing their business here. So with that, I will respectfully ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, Chairman's back, but I think we're ready for questions.
Go on, Vice Chair.
Delegate Brooks had his hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Vice Chair. This can go for either of you. So in addition to the filing fee, does not the company pay an assessment based on the personal property that's being assessed, that's being reported?
Yes, my understanding that is the companies do for personal properties, it's all at the county levels now. The counties administer, because the state since 1980s, I think, set the assessment as 0. So personal property taxes are all paid to the county, but businesses all have to pay $300 flat regardless, except for sole proprietors and the family farms and so forth. And just to be in good standing. And I can point out one fact that you probably would laugh at, which is we even require businesses to tell us that they are folding their businesses by charging them $100 just to tell us that they are going under. So we have a lot of unreasonable fee structures in place that would hopefully amend through this analysis.
Okay, thanks. And do we have any idea how much is collected in fees?
Well, if you waive all of them, I can tell you a broad brush. I don't have specific numbers. I can tell you, let's say we are going to waive all of the business filing fees. Then each year it would affect the state coffer by $90 million. But we're not asking for waiving all of the fees. We're just asking to reduce the burden according to size or revenue, perhaps, and making ourselves more competitive with surrounding jurisdictions, or maybe even less frequency like some other states, you know.
All right, well, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions on House Bill 56, I'm sorry. Seeing none, I believe that concludes the testimony on House Bill 356. Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure which one you wanted to take next.
I don't believe that Delegate Wilson may still be with Ways and Means. So unless I'm not hearing him, if Delegate Smith is with us, let's go with Delegate Smith, and I'll let Delegate Wilson know that we're just about ready for him. So do we have Delegate Smith?
I don't see.
Okay. All right. Guys, give us about 2 minutes, and I'll find one of them.
Delegate Wilson just popped up, D.
All right, Delegate Wilson.
Okay.
Ready for me to go, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, and esteemed colleagues and members of the committee. Delegate C.T. Wilson here presenting House Bill 106, off the Attorney General website to report robocalls and other spam calls. And just real briefly, just tell you a story about at least twice a month, I get the very same call. Individual with a foreign accent calls from the IRS and tells me that, asks me if I've ever been to Texas. I, of course, say yes. And he asked me, have you been to Texas recently? And I said, yeah, at least 2 weeks ago. Then he asked me if I've leased a car. I said, yes, I lease cars in Texas all the time. Then he gives me a description of a car, and I say, of course, yes, that is a car I've leased. And then he tells me that that they found some drugs and guns in the car, and then trace that to an address that was rented in my name. And he tells me where the address is, and I say, well, yeah, I have a house there, but it's not mine. It's just I rent it. And then he goes on to tell me about he found at least 15 to 20 kilos of cocaine and many other guns too. And at that point, I usually get very irate. And I say, are you sure it was just 20 kilos? Because I know I left with 40. And it sounds like a joke because I'm making light of the situation, but I do that every time. The reason I do that as often as I can is because I know if they're talking to me, they're not talking to some senior citizen that they can bilk out of their money. And that's what this bill is about. It's not just about harassment. It's about the cost that we have to Maryland citizens. Spam calls grew 54 billion last year. That's a 108% increase. And basically Maryland, we're the #1 state of robocalls. On average, we receive at least 18 a month. Seniors lose roughly $2.9 billion annually, from this financial exploration. And the big one they do is impersonating IRS officials. As of October 2020, 26 residents of Montgomery County have lost $1.5 million since June. The victims are either from anywhere from $800 to $200,000. Excuse me, guys, these braces are really throwing my speech off. I'm trying, but basically the issues right now is while we try to ignore spam calls and we try to block them, not everybody does that. And some of them can't be blocked. And many of you guys know they don't look like spam numbers anymore. There are states like West Virginia, South Carolina, and Virginia, which have all come up with some kind of methodology to either stop, catalog, or punish the offenders. In years past, we've talked to the phone companies and we've asked them, and they have said they have no idea how to stop this, which I also find ironic because when I buy phone numbers for my law firm, I know exactly which number I'm buying. It's the number they're using, and I have to pay for it. But until we can find a way through our individual phone companies, I'm asking that our Attorney General come up with some solution that will allow us to at least report these threats, get these numbers cataloged so we can do something about it. Because at this point, nobody knows what to do when they receive a call. But if we can start flagging these calls, flagging them by number, making these numbers unavailable, maybe we can get to the root of the problem. I know this is maybe a costly situation, but I believe it's more than time for somebody to step up in Maryland. And I think the Attorney General is the perfect vessel to do so. I'm looking forward to a favorable report on House Bill 106.
Any questions for the sponsor?
Mr. Chair, I have a quick question for Delegate Wilson.
Delegate Crosby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hey, Delegate Wilson, I'm just kind of curious. You said they catalog the numbers. I've actually been spam called by my own number, which is interesting. So how would that work if they were to report my phone number to the Attorney General? Because that has happened to me.
I have no idea because that's not my bailiwick. I used to be in telecommunications. That was in the 90s. Things have changed since then. That's what I need the Attorney General to get involved in. Somebody's got to figure this out. You're right. I have no idea how the new digital cross connects work, but I do know that our phone companies most likely can get a handle on it. Like I said, this has been in West Virginia, for God's sakes. I know Maryland can catch up to West Virginia. So all I'm asking is for them to intercede, and maybe the AG can come back with a recommendation in the year on either way for us to punish these individuals or at least find out who the wrongdoers are. At this point, it's out of my league. It's above my pay grade. And I'd like to turn to somebody who actually has more power, influence, and possibly can get these wrongdoers, to do the right thing.
Okay, I guess I'll follow up with the Attorney General because I'd be curious. All right, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Delegate Wilson.
Yes.
You mean Walker?
I mean, Walker.
Hey, man,
I'm not going to say it, though.
I was just going to ask, like, in English, can you tell me what you're doing, CT?
Well, right now, we're just trying to to start. We would just like to get the Attorney General to basically get a public service campaign, a number that we can call, a place we can report these erroneous numbers to. We're not asking him to do anything definitive beyond get the ball rolling. And then we can come back with quantified information. And I would assume the AG would do it on his own once we do that. But this is nothing more than to get the ball rolling by having the AG get a public service campaign out, letting especially our senior citizens know that if they're targeted, they can report at least that number and any information that comes along with that number from the conversation.
So you're thinking about like having an 800 number that people can call into or generic?
Without a doubt. An 800 number that people could report into and some advertisement along with it, especially to our seniors and our senior homes. So they know that because they're the ones that are being targeted.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Any additional questions for the sponsor? He's the only witness, so.
There's a Delegate Watson, I think, has one.
Delegate Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I was just curious how I think we have a federal or a national do not call list or something. How is this different than that? Or
Because that
something?
that doesn't work. And that does not do anything to give us the information where these numbers, even what phone calls or what phone companies these numbers are being routed through.
Okay.
Right now, I don't know, we've all put our name on that. I put my number on it several times, and I seem to get more calls after I sign up for that. So I honestly thought that was part of the plot.
Yeah.
But right now, that is not working for anybody that I know. This is just getting the state involved, as a few other states have, to try to find a solution. I would say, we can't do nothing. And right now, I don't see us doing anything as a state to protect these seniors and get to the root of who these calls are coming from.
So you could, so your bill would require the state to allow a vehicle to collect the information.
Correct.
Okay, so once they have the information, your bill require them to make a report after a certain period of time?
Honestly, at this point, because I was hoping the AG, once they started collecting information and brought this under their bailiwick, would then be the ones to enforce. I didn't want to tell them how to do their job. I didn't want to take it a step too far. This really is something to get the ball rolling. So to say there's a solution to this, I don't know. I would leave that to the subject matter experts to find out what the proper remedy would be through either the wrongdoer or maybe even the phone companies. I just know that we can't do nothing. And from all the research I've done, it starts with being able to gather information and having some place you can report this to.
Mm-hmm. And the fiscal note of 45,000, what is that intended to cover? Do you know?
Beats the life out of me. I honestly, I thought
it looks like a salary for somebody.
Yeah.
Okay. But I guess my point is it talks about a salary, but it's not talking about expenses that might be required to do the part of it that is probably really important, which is educate, notify seniors. And
I was just as surprised as you were with the fiscal note, because I would assume getting a 1-800 number, some kind of public service campaign would be more costly. So I'm not going to try and mislead my colleagues. I think it's going to be more expensive than that, but I don't think it'll cost near amount of money that Marylanders lose every year from being bilked out of their hard-earned money.
But does the bill require that that public campaign?
Yes, the way it was presented to me, yes, that's what it's requiring.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? If I'm missing anyone, please jump in. If not, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The bill hearing for House Bill 106. I'd now like to go to our last bill of the day, House Bill 41, Delegate Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also greetings to Vice Chair Dumais and all the members of the committee. For the record, my name is Delegate Stephanie Smith of the 45th District, and I'm here discussing House Bill 41. It would establish the creation of a Maryland State Bank Task Force, and that would be assessing the feasibility and the viability of establishing a Maryland State Bank. Now, I know some people might wonder, well, what problem am I endeavoring to solve by even bringing this bill before your committee? Well, we are going through a moment of ongoing fiscal stress, both at the state level as well as the municipal and county level. And this is across the country. Maryland is faring a bit better at the state level than we may have thought for a variety of reasons. But I thought to myself, these moments that the pandemic pose, there are going to be new challenges in the future. We can't always forecast what's going to be the economic challenge of the future, but how can we maybe foster some innovation through these challenges so that we're even better prepared to stand up, infrastructure investments. We're better.
Yeah, I see a hand up, but I don't know.
Community development. We're better able to stand up small business support during those future lean times by kind of laying some groundwork in the midst of the moment we find ourselves in now, because quite frankly, there's always going to be another challenge. We can't always forecast what the shape would be. So I was drawn to this topic because there was a 2019 study that was commissioned by the Able Foundation that explored what this could mean for Baltimore City specifically, but also for the state of Maryland. Many of our, banking entities are based outside of Maryland, and though they are often, doing good work in many quarters of our state, there are still pockets of our state that are still waiting for their moment. They're waiting for their moment to escape systemic disinvestment, and they're waiting for their moment to see the community development amenities and needs that we all want no matter where we live. So a public bank can kind of go one of three ways in terms of concept. It could be focused on providing commercial banking and capital market services. It could be focused on providing equitable access to financial services for individuals, or it could also be really a direct investment that would go to a municipality or a county, for example, to develop local infrastructure, housing, and economic growth. So with that in mind, I thought to myself, and I discussed with some of my colleagues, that I'm not one who personally is excited about a bill that is about a task force generally. But when you're talking about something this complex and sensitive, I felt that it would be improper just to put forth a bill because there's so many players that would really need to hash out kind of the merits, the design, and the purpose of such an endeavor. And I think the core thing I want to leave with you before I allow the other folks to, dig in with their testimony is that exploring the feasibility of a Maryland public bank does not seek to replace private sector banking, but only to supplement the capitalization of communities with unmet needs. For our disinvested communities to receive the capital needed to start businesses, innovate housing affordability, and realize infrastructure improvements, it's going to require creativity and more coordinated investment strategies in the public interest to ultimately entice private sector support. So it's to enhance, it's to, in many ways, I think many people in this committee are proponents of competition yielding better outcomes. And right now we have so many parts of our state with unmet needs. And I think it's worth looking forward through this moment to see if maybe there could be another way we are the best fiscal stewards and the best leaders for our state moving forward. So with that, I just want to highlight that I do have several folks that will be testifying, including the Maryland Cash Campaign, the Community Development Network of Maryland, Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition, and the Maryland Center on Economic Policy, and the Maryland DC Credit Union Association. I also want to offer that I will be offering an amendment that I believe was received. There were some technical issues with the amendment office transmissions, but it will essentially add to the scope of the task force to look at public state dollars being deposited in other not-for-profit financial institutions like credit unions. And I just wanted to bring that to your attention because there were some technical challenges with the amendment office and they sent over an unofficial version, Mr. Chair. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew that, but your staff has been, informed along the way. Thank you for your time, and I do hope that I can receive a favorable report for House Bill 41. Thank you to you all. And this is a day where we've seen things we've never seen before, and in ode to that, I'm wearing my Howard sweater. I think Delegate Walker might be appreciative. I think he's flexing something too. So again, we've seen something today that we've never seen before. So I don't want unfamiliarity or something new to be the impediment to innovation. Thank you.
We're not going to even mess with
What?
Walker.
What?
Nothing.
Not today.
Any questions for Delegate Smith?
Delegate Smith, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Nope. Go on, Delegate Rogers.
Delegate Smith, I just wanted to ask if you're wearing your Chucks as well.
Oh, here we go.
Okay, I'm going to keep it real with you. Most of you know I'm a very tall person. Chucks do not do a size 11 foot any justice, so I'm not very interested in owning any.
Mr.
Anyone
Chair.
else?
Mr.
Delegate
Chair.
Walker.
Thank you. Serious question. Are there any other states that have state banks?
Yes, Delegate. Actually, there's one. It's North Dakota, and they've had it for just over 100 years, I believe. I think they're just over the 100-year threshold. But to note, it's not for consumer banking. It is for that latter description. It's just for infrastructure improvement that's really focused on community development infrastructure, and it's money lent to the localities within North Dakota.
All right. If there are no additional questions, I think I see one.
Mr. Chair.
Delegate Impalaria.
I think she answered my question, Mr. Chair, but you probably remember. This sounds like Delegate Gutierrez bill that we've heard many times before.
Is that a question to me, sir?
Go ahead, Delegate Smith.
I'm trying to go through the history of had we heard the bill before, and I remember Delegate Gutierrez used to bring this bill in.
And a soul, you may be right. Yeah.
Yes.
You are correct. That
Okay.
person did bring that bill, but this is a new bill because I'm bringing it and bringing it with a new energy and hopefully a different perspective. But I appreciate your recall. Very impressive.
You're much more attractive than the last.
I'll take
Here
it.
we go. Here we go.
Especially with the big H. So
We're gonna, let me move this right along. Thank you so much, Delegate Smith. Let me go on to my next witness real quick. Delegate Moore, Tanae Moore.
Tanea Moore? Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Davis, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of House Bill 41. My name is Tanea Moore, and I'm the Policy Manager for the Cash Campaign of Maryland. The Cash Campaign of Maryland promotes economic advancement for low to moderate income individuals and families in Baltimore and across the state of Maryland. Some of the ways Cash accomplishes its mission is by providing free tax preparation services and offering free financial education and coaching. Almost 4,000 of our tax preparation clients earn less than $10,000 annually. More than half earn less than $20,000 annually. House Bill 41 is an opportunity to review and evaluate how a state bank can be implemented to respond to our state's needs. This could include infrastructure projects, access to safe banking, and affordable housing. For example, a state bank can support small businesses by providing them a safe way to access loans. This will contribute to revitalizing and maintaining small businesses, which is important to building strong communities. Access to safe loans can also encourage entrepreneurship, which will bring new and essential services to our local communities. A Maryland State Bank would have the ability to provide support to our local economy, especially during times of economic hardships. This is especially relevant to the conversation today as COVID-19 has caused significant damage to local economies across Maryland. This damage has unfortunately led to high unemployment rates, business closures, and resources leaving our communities. One of the ways a state bank may fix some of these damages, such as high unemployment rates, is by creating new jobs. Currently, as Delegate Smith said, North Dakota is the only state that has their own public bank. The Bank of North Dakota supports a robust local development agenda and aims at uplifting communities. A Maryland State Bank has the potential to impact our economic growth, job creation, and state revenues. Establishing the Maryland State Bank Task Force is an important step as we continue to search for ways to push our state forward. For these reasons, we respectfully ask for a favorable report, and thank you again for providing me the opportunity to support this bill.
Any questions of Ms. Moore?
Delegate Queen.
Madam Vice Chair?
I'm sorry, I should say Delegate Queen had a question.
Delegate Queen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me know where I should put my hand to raise, because I'm not sure.
I would just sort of jump in there or something. I can't figure this thing out.
No problem. Thank you, Ms. Moore. So I'm a great proponent of the cash campaign. I think you do a great job. What I wasn't understanding, and maybe you can help me a little bit with, is what is it that we would get from the state bank that's not being handled from the CRA programs and other things, initiatives that our credit unions, our state charter banks do? I'm still not quite sure are we not doing those well enough, or do we need some other program that expands that more? I'm still not understanding what we're missing with what the structure we have now.
Delegate Queen, thank you for that question. I think it's just about expanding. So for example, I mentioned about creating new jobs, and it's important to note that one of the top 10 facts of public banking is that public banks are required to benefit the public by serving local community needs.
Mm-hmm. But we only have one public bank in our state, and I think Puerto Rico has one too, which is, as was mentioned, North Dakota. So we don't have, so what, again, I agree with what public banks should do, but we're not doing it in any other states. So is there some other program that's doing that gap? Because North Dakota is pretty much, in Puerto Rico, the only ones that have.
Mr. Chair, could I offer some support to Delegate Queen's inquiry? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Delegate Queen, for that question, because it's an important question. So I know that the author of the ABLE report will be joining us, so I don't want to steal too much of his thunder. But one of the things outlined is that despite the Community Reinvestment Act, which you mentioned, which many people do know is only at its most robust value when banks are generally merging. The CRA of the 21st century is not quite the same in terms of the impact. So for example, in the ABLE report, it discusses the fact that since 2008, we've seen, local branches of banks disappearing in many communities. So similar to the notion that we have food deserts, we have financial services deserts. So there's still communities that are just not gaining access. And in the Baltimore region specifically, for Black residents of the Baltimore region, the last time that we had data available to this point, I believe it was in 2013, it noted that roughly 41% of households were underbanked and about, I think, 13% were just totally not operating with any access to a banking relationship. So there's clearly some unmet needs on the personal banking front, but I do want to lift up that assessing the viability of a public bank is not exclusively whether it would function as a consumer banking entity. The one in North Dakota doesn't function as a consumer banking entity at all. It functions as a driver of investment and infrastructure and community development to municipalities and counties. So it can be, what we're discussing does not exist, the consumer, kind of facing public bank on the state level. So, for Maryland, it could be kind of the purpose of the task force to see, should it be the North Dakota model, or maybe it should be a hybrid based on the needs that are being unmet in various quarters of the state. So I hope that gave some additional context.
I think that's helpful. I think, so what we're asking for is to study the feasibility of is what you're asking in this bill. Okay, I can understand that. Thank you.
Anyone else for Ms. Moore? Speak up or forever hold your peace. All right, let me go.
Delegate Watson, sorry.
Delegate Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a point of privilege. I would like to counteract my friend Delegate Impelaria's comment about you, Delegate Smith, by saying that it is not your looks as a female delegate that are impressive, but your intellectual strength, your confidence, and your hard work on behalf of our citizens. And I suspect he probably meant to say that instead.
Check is in the mail, Delegate Watson. I appreciate those kind words.
Anyone else? Seeing none, let me go to Rory Murray.
Mr. Chairman, would it be okay if my boss went before me? We have a testimony that follows one another. It's John Bratsakis, same association.
Mr. Bratsakis.
Thank you, Chairman Davis, Vice Chair Dumais, and thank you, Delegate Smith, for including us. I'm John Bratsakis, President and CEO of the Maryland DC Credit Union Association. Just want to make a few comments. First, I think the title of the bill might be just a tad misleading for the task force just to look at the feasibility of the bank, because when you dig into the information and take a look at it, it's much broader as whether or not state government is making the best decisions with money on behalf of the people, which we support that mission. So as Delegate Smith said, while the bill has not been updated, there is an amendment that's been done, and it simply states that the amendment would advocate for and support the implementation of laws and regulations allowing for not-for-profit financial cooperatives and community-based financial institutions to serve as financial stewards for government entities and encourage government entities to use these entities for their financial needs. I think one of the things when you look at some of the other times these have come up, and when you look at many other public bank task force and studies in the recent years, DC just did a study from 2018 to 2020 and found that at least in DC, the primary reason identified by public banking advocates was to have the district government stop using Wall Street banks, which would save costs, keep the dollars local, and divest banks that engage in harmful practices. So this tends to be the impetus for most of these public bank pushes. So we just wanted to make sure that we remind everyone that is, not-for-profit financial cooperatives can be used and be a solution. Credit unions can help with the problem. We'd like to thank the sponsor for her time to talk with us and figure out how we can all partner together and take a look at this through the task force. So if it's acceptable, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to turn it over to Rory to finish off our testimony.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Chairman, Vice Chairman, members of the committee, it's wonderful to see everybody in such an interesting year. I'd like to first really thank the sponsor for taking the time to talk with us. Some of you might be thinking of why is a financial industry trade association in favor of a public bank task force? Well, it came down to, we just read the bill, and the more I read into the bill, the more I thought to myself, we can do this. We can definitely help this issue. And luckily, Delegate Smith, we had just the most wonderful conversation and said, yeah, we're on the same page with a lot of this. So when we look into what the goals of this task force are, as my boss said, it's not just we're going to create a state bank. It's far broader of, is the money being held and spent the right way on behalf of the people? So the goals of the task force, the first, strengthen the economic and community development needs of Maryland. Well, community financial institutions, credit unions, that's exactly what we do. We're chartered to serve certain communities. Our members own the credit union 100%. They're woven into the fabric of where they are. And most of them tend to be, in Maryland, there's 77 headquartered here, serving here. The DC study that John had spoken about found that credit unions are a valuable resource for small business lending in the district. They're the ideal loan providers for small businesses and sole proprietorships, since they typically provide lower interest rates on loans. And they often direct their services to low income and minority areas. Once again, this just alignment of what the goal of the task force is and what our goal is. The second big one was reducing the cost paid for basic banking services. If the state has an X billion dollar a year operating budget, and that is being kept in banks, Wall Street banks are typically the impetus for these bills. So if they're kept in Wall Street banks, those banks are using that money like any other to loan it out, and they're making money on that. And the profits, parts of the profits go to outside investors. With credit unions, the members own the credit union. Any profit is put back into the credit union to improve the credit union and then given back to the members via dividends. If the general fund, if the state of Maryland or a municipality is the client of the credit union, they have that exact same benefit. So once again, we're just matching up here on a lot of what the goals are. As John said earlier, we support the state looking at all options. If we're doing the right thing, we're not threatened by the future of a state bank, because what we expect to see from this study, like we see from most, is that the infrastructure already exists to accomplish most of these goals. Things just need to be changed in the way that the state holds and spends money to make sure that it's being used in the best way for the people. So I think I'm not speaking out of turn when the sponsor has agreed with us when we brought that up. She added the amendment to the bill, which hasn't been reprinted yet, that will encourage policies for not-for-profit banking, community banking of government funds. Anytime we're looking at how we can improve the lives of Marylanders, we're on board. We're here, we're chartered to be here, we're staying. And our members are our investment. So that's all I've got. Thanks for letting me speak.
Any questions?
Delegate Howard has a question.
Delegate Howard.
So just very quickly, Delegate Smith, if I could get a copy of your ABLE report. I was able to look up ABLE report online just very quickly, and I was able to find some stuff about an ABLE Act, which is a 2014 act for the IRS to create tax-free accounts for Americans with disabilities. Obviously not what we're talking about here today, I'd like to see that report. So if you could shoot that over to me via email, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Is there anyone else?
Delegate Aaron's.
Delegate Aaron?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Murray, how do you have a nonprofit bank?
So it's a not-for-profit bank. A 30-second rundown of American credit union history is necessary to understand why credit unions have that tax status. Right after the Great Depression, the Great Depression, late 1920s, early 1930s, farmers could not get loans from banks. So they started pooling their own money together and loaning it to each other, and there'd be some sort of administrative fee just to pay for the administrative costs of however they were doing this. This concept grew into the modern day credit union, which is a financial cooperative. So it's still people pooling their own money together and lending it to each other. That's why there's no outside investment. It's all from the members. It all stays inside. So when in 1934, when the Federal Credit Union Act was created, they looked at the structure and the mission of credit unions. The structure was a democratically controlled financial cooperative. The mission was to, at the time, more or less, lend to those who couldn't find lending from anywhere else, not necessarily high-risk lenders, but just not those that were going to be the most profitable to the current banking institutions. And they said, if your mission remains that you're going to have lower fees, you're going to return any really overhead profits that aren't necessary to the continuation of the credit union back to the members, we will grant you a 501c tax exemption. And federally chartered credit unions have a different tax exemption number than state chartered, but they're all 501c.
So you're asking then for legislation to enable more breaks, if you will, or how is this? I guess I'm looking at the funding source to start this. And you can do that now, I would assume.
Well, this would work under current Maryland law. There's 35 states that allow credit unions to be depositories of government funds and allow governments to put funds into credit unions. Maryland is not one of those states. So what we're looking at here, and the same thing we were looking at DC, they were in a little bit of a different posture because at the time they didn't have a credit union act, which now they do, was people didn't want to see their money being used for government purposes put in Wall Street banks, because for years now, especially like Wells Fargo is always, just because of their size, they're a major partner of a lot of municipalities and states. That angered people. So all that would be needed from our end is legislation that would enable it. So then if the state decided, hey, we want to use a credit union as the steward of our funds, as our financial partner, we can do that. And obviously the rates and fees are lower. Any dividends or any profits made on those state funds would be returned right back into the general fund.
Okay. I might have some more questions for you later if you don't mind. Thanks.
Sure, of course.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure. Did I miss anyone? Seeing none, hearing none. Let me go to Sean Vanetta.
Great. Thank you, Chairman Davis, Vice Chairman, members of the committee, Delegate Smith, for introducing this legislation. My name is Dr. Sean Vanetta, and I'm a U.S. financial historian, and I currently teach at the University of Glasgow in Scotland. In July 2019, the Able Foundation published my report, The Municipal Banking Movement, an Opportunity for Baltimore, which examines the public banking movement and the lessons that it holds for policymakers and activists in that city. My written testimony today draws on that study and more recent developments in the public banking movement. Now, public banking is simply the public ownership of financial institutions. In the same way that private shareholders own private financial firms, and as owners, establish business plans and monitor business performance, so too do citizens collectively own financial firms, establishing business plans and monitoring performance through their elected representatives. Public ownership does not mean public management. Public banks are managed by experienced bankers, not by politicians. The public sets the objectives consistent with the bank's need to generate self-sustaining revenue. Bank managers then endeavor to meet those objectives consistent with the ongoing safety and soundness of the firm. In this way, public banks are similar to private financial institutions or cooperatives, but private shareholders instruct managers, in these institutions, private shareholders instruct managers not only to generate profits, but also to meet environmental, social, and governance objectives. It's simply the case that for private financial firms, profits come first. Now, public banking is a complement to private banking, not a substitute. Effective public banks work with community banks, credit unions, and other mission-driven lenders, multiplying their capacity to invest in worthwhile local projects. They're also patient. They do not freeze local lending whenever a cold breeze blows down Wall Street. Thus, the key difference between public banks and private banks is that with public banks, citizens and local stakeholders, not distant wealthy shareholders, own the businesses and define its objectives. Public banking shifts the purpose of financial activity away from short-term profit and toward long-term community development. Public banking aims to be more inclusive, more democratic, more transparent, and more accountable. I support House Bill 41 because it offers a prudent plan for evaluating the opportunities and challenges of public banking in Maryland. Policymakers and the public must have confidence that a publicly owned bank will meet community needs not currently being satisfied by private firms or government agencies. By convening a task force and charging it with evaluating feasibility and usefulness of a state-owned public bank, the legislature will determine if a Maryland public bank clears this threshold, and if so, will provide an evidentiary foundation and roadmap for further action. And it's a step I think the legislature should take. Thank you.
Any questions?
Delegate Charkoudian had her hand up.
Delegate Charkoudian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony. Can you speak to this question about does the state investing its money in a state bank, if we were to determine this or out of this task force, can you explain how it keeps money in the state or in the areas that are being invested, right? I mean, because at this point, if we're investing in Wells Fargo or holding our accounts in Wells Fargo or some other Wall Street bank, can you talk about what happens to profits off of those deposits as opposed to what would happen if those same deposits were in the state, and what the implications might be for our budgets?
Absolutely. I think when money is deposited with Wells Fargo, right, it goes into Wells Fargo's kind of central treasury. And Wells Fargo, as you know, is a global bank. And so that money then Wells Fargo might lend out in South Carolina or Scotland or, sort of anywhere around the world where Wells Fargo has operations. They certainly could lend it back into Maryland. But it's up to Wells Fargo. They get to decide where that money will be lent. And then likewise, any profits that Wells Fargo generates by lending out those deposits will be, given to Wells Fargo shareholders who are, again, possibly Maryland state pensioners own shares of Wells Fargo, but of course, many other institutional investors and private investors do too. So the profits are going to be distributed across the nation and around the globe. With a state-owned public bank, again, just to take this idea that the state is depositing its money with the bank, there are different models the state could pursue. That money would be lent locally, so you could establish, within the charter that the money will be used, for projects in Maryland and, possibly neighboring states to provide some flexibility. And so the bank would either make direct investments or business loans, or it would partner. So, the gentleman from the credit union association, right? The credit union might want to make a loan that's larger than it feels comfortable with. And so the state could partner with the credit union. Each could take half of the loan. And that way, again, a worthwhile project that the credit union might not take on its own because it doesn't feel like it can risk that much of its capital on such a project. In partnership with the state bank, it would be able to do that. So again, this means that the state's money is not profiting faraway shareholders, but is staying within the state, and any profits, again, that are earned off of that lending would also stay in the state and potentially be returned to the state through the bank in the way that the Bank of North Dakota does, returns cash to its legislature every year.
Anyone else?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Delegate Aaron's.
Delegate Aaron's. And
Mr. Vanatta, what if the opposite occurs, meaning that this small bank can't afford it and they go ahead and they get a partner on that and they lose money? How does that affect state finances?
So the idea, if you charter the state bank, what you're going to do is create a separate financial institution. There are different ways to structure that, but ultimately you want the bank to be autonomous from the state. So this will require an investment by the state, but in the end, right, you're sort of separating the bank from the state. Also, the bank will act like a bank. So certainly it is a risk, right? The bank could make a series of poor decisions and go bankrupt. But I think what is more likely is that the bank will diversify its risks. So like any financial institution, it may lose money on some risks and make money on others. And of course, the officers of the bank will understand that it's their job to invest prudently and not recklessly. And so, again, yes, this is not a risk-free proposition, but public banks, while not common in the United States, are enormously common in other financial systems. So in Europe,
but we are in the United States, and I understand your comment. But I'm sitting back saying, so right now we're in the same situation as a regular bank would be, and you're asking us to do something somebody else has done. I think my point would be is what happens on the other side? The taxpayers then foot that bill. Is that right?
I mean, in that scenario, sure. But I think what I'm telling you is that scenario is unlikely. That the bank may.
I understand that, but we have seen banks fail in the past. Have we or have we not?
I mean, certainly. Although I would say bank failures are extremely.
Well, they have
uncommon.
failed, and now you're asking us to now take on another burden on the taxpayers. That if these things should fail, the taxpayers then all subsidize this. And my guess is that it's a nice idea if you can afford it, and if we can do some other types of legislation to allow people to enter into this, it might be a more attractive way of attacking this problem that we have in the state. Is that right?
I mean, I think that's certainly a way to view it.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Anyone else? All right. Thank you very much. Let's go to Marceline White now.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. My name is Marceline White. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition, MCRC. And MCRC works to advance economic rights and financial inclusion through research, education, advocacy, organizing, and direct service. I'm happy to be here today in strong support of HB 41. I don't want to reiterate the comments that you've already heard, so I just want to make a few points and answer any questions. You have my written testimony. First, just a reminder that what this bill is doing is it's establishing a task force to thoroughly investigate and answer and analyze many of the questions that have been raised already. So it would establish a task force to look at what a public bank or other kinds of entities like credit unions could do in terms of serving the state and providing investment and what kinds of models would be the best way to provide new investments or different investments to meet community needs in our state. So it established the task force, which I think is important. And we know this is important right now because of the global pandemic and economic crisis that we're suffering through. As we all know, the global pandemic has made clear in Baltimore that we've had and continue to have racial disparities in terms of home ownership, and we have a health and wealth crisis in our state, where we see different impacts in terms of the economic recession and home ownership. We know that home ownership and investment in small businesses and entrepreneurs are critical to addressing the racial wealth gap, and also critical to building assets and wealth in our communities. In the past 10 years, banks have undergone consolidation. So small and medium-sized banks have consolidated into larger banks. What we would hope is to then see commensurate increased investments in our communities. But in fact, the opposite has happened. Johns Hopkins 21st Century Cities did a study, and they found that between 2007 and 2016, small business lending fell from 17,084 loans to 8,274 loans in Baltimore City, while at the same time, deposits doubled. So you're seeing an increase in our deposits, but a decrease in lending to our small business entrepreneurs. Particularly important now in the face of the global pandemic. And similarly, we've seen a number of brick and mortar branches close. And that's critically important because that means, as Delegate Smith mentioned and others, if you have a banking desert and people can't get to an ATM or a branch, they're going to rely on costly alternative financial products. So we've seen that as well. And that's particularly difficult for older adults in our cities who may have mobility issues about getting to other banks. What this would do is look at a public bank as an option, and other banks that would complement existing banking efforts and could supplement those efforts to invest in areas that have not received investment over the past several decades, and thus bolster wealth and economic success and business success for those who have been neglected. I just want to mention, folks mentioned the Community Reinvestment Act. I serve on a national board that looks at the Community Reinvestment Act across the country, and MCRC leads a group called Reinvest Baltimore, which focuses on engaging Baltimore neighborhood leaders around the Community Reinvestment Act. And there's broad agreement nationally that the CRA is a very, very important tool, but one that needs to be reformed and modernized. Right now, you think about all of the national banks, 98% receive a satisfactory rating on their CRA exams. And there's lots of reasons for that, but it certainly doesn't reflect the voices of local activists and local community leaders in terms of some of those ratings. This provides another option and another look at how we can best invest in our communities and close the racial wealth gap by closing the home ownership gap and making sure small lending is going to entrepreneurs who have great ideas that need it. So for all of these reasons, we're in strong support of establishing this task force to look at how a state bank and other kinds of options could work in the state. And I urge you to give this a favorable report. Thank you.
Any questions for Ms. White? Anyone? If not, thank you very much. I'm going to stick with the favorables for a little bit. So if I can go to Ms. Claudia Wilson Randall.
Good afternoon. My name is Claudia Wilson Randall. I'm the Executive Director of the Community Development Network of Maryland. I'm happy to be here, Chairman Davis and members of the House Economic Matters Committee. The mission of the Community Development Network of Maryland is to promote, strengthen, and advocate for the community development sector throughout Maryland's urban, suburban, and rural communities. CDN works towards creating opportunities for communities throughout the state. I don't really want to, I feel like my colleagues in the nonprofit sector, the Cash Campaign and MCRC have, stolen some of my thunder. So I don't need to repeat everything that they have to say, but just to add, I just want to emphasize a couple of points. One, as we think about an equitable economic recovery from the pandemic statewide, we really have to think about innovative strategies to repair the damage that has been done to the economy. And I think that this bill, HB 41 and task force may be a way towards some of that innovation. The other point that I want to make is just solutions for disinvested communities across the state, where many people live without a branch, without, in a 10-block radius, and they have no banking relationship. And that's the critical component to wealth building and economic success. And so you've got folks, relying on check cashers and alternative financing and predatory lending. It's just not the way that we're going to actually drive investment in that community. The other piece, I think Marceline did an excellent job of talking about banking consolidation and of financial institutions that we've seen in the last 10 years. I just want to mention that the Senate study that was just completed, the study on equity and inclusion, talks a lot about this and actually says that a more thorough understanding of banking landscapes in Maryland is necessary to determine precise recommendations and potential legislative actions. So not everything necessarily has to be done through legislative action, but I think, both the House and the Senate, they really need to take a look at some of these banking and investment relationships. I will say that, a typical banking relationship or capitalism relationship in these disinvested communities is not going to take care of or drive investment in some of our underinvested communities throughout the state. And so we really need to be forward thinking and think about how we might use this as a tool towards innovation and financing. And with that, I'm going to stop. Thank you so much. You're muted.
Any questions for Ms. Randall? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Randall. Lamar Robinson. Do we have Mr. Robinson with us?
Chair, that is my legislative director. He's not giving testimony. He may be assisted and maybe uploading something.
Got you. Thank you, Delegate Smith. Well, now we'll switch over and go to Robert Enton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Robert Enton on behalf of the Maryland Bankers Association. This has been a pretty interesting hearing so far. The first thing I guess I'd like to say is that I did have a nice conversation with Delegate Smith on Friday. We talked about the bill. And I think our opposition, and we are strongly opposed, it's not so much about, taking a look at this or taking a look at, lending and communities. This is about having a task force to talk about creating a state bank which would compete with our existing banking industry. And that's a grave concern to us. I looked at the ABLE Foundation. I didn't even know about the ABLE Foundation. Delegate Smith was nice enough to tell me about it. And they have a map. And notwithstanding the fact that this issue has come up in some form in 18 other states, not a single state has ever enacted a state banking law other than North Dakota, which did it in 2012 when there were no banks in the entire state of North Dakota. Our banks, some of which are still in existence today, go back to the 1800s. In the United States, it's North Dakota and it's the island of Samoa. And that's it. Notwithstanding the fact that there have been studies in other states, notwithstanding the fact that there are groups out there that, just as they're pushing it here today, push it in the other states. I'd also like to take comment on the testimony by my good friends at the credit unions and remind the committee that last year there was a bill which would have empowered the credit unions to take state deposits. And that bill was defeated in the House Economic Matters Committee on a 19-6 vote. The Senate bill never came up for a vote at all in Senate Finance. If this bill is just more than a vehicle for credit unions who are specifically mentioned in the bill to take state deposits, that's a separate issue and not something which should be even really part of this bill whatsoever. I guess the bottom line for us, and you have our written testimony, which is pretty detailed. The reason it's detailed is because we've dealt with this bill I think either 4 or 5 other occasions over the last decade, and the bill was always resoundingly defeated in the House Economic Matters Committee. And I think that, to go back to one of the questions that we got and a comment, banks are regulated by if they're state charter banks, by the Maryland Commissioner of Financial Regulation. Those banks are also regulated by the FDIC. Many of those banks are also regulated by the Federal Reserve. The large national banks are all regulated by the Office of the Comptroller of Currency and all regulated by the FDIC. So one of the questions I think is that when the gentleman who testified, I guess, as the expert on this from Scotland, talked about the fact that, the scenario, I think, which Delegate Ahrens pointed out was, quote, unlikely, unquote. How do we know whether it's unlikely or not unlikely? Because no one in the world does it. And no one in the United States has ever done it except the state of North Dakota, which has a very limited program. I also heard some talk about community banks. You will recall in the bill that the credit unions had introduced last year, the witnesses at the table were all from community banks. Our community banks are actively engaged in business lending. They're actively engaged in working within their communities. And our community banks are every bit as much opposed to the notion of having a state bank as our larger banks. I just will finally, I guess, close. I could go on, and maybe I'll get some questions. But I just would say that if whatever business you're in, you want to have so maybe we should have, the state should have insurance agents. We should have state employees act as insurance agents. Maybe we should have state employees act as accountants. Maybe we should have state grocery stores. I mean, we're in business. And unlike other businesses and any other businesses, we are subject to the Community Reinvestment Act. We are committed to investing in our communities. And we just don't really think that this task force is appropriate. We don't think it'll go anywhere. If this bill, quite frankly, had said we want to have this is a task force look at how can we increase small business lending, how can we increase things in the communities, which is part of what the Senate is recommending, I don't know that I would have, testified with so much passion today. But this is a bill we've seen time and time again in the past, and we think to have a task force, and they were task force bills the last few years, it's just unnecessary, and we would urge you to give the bill an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Let me go with, I think I see 3 hands. We'll go with Delegate Charkoudian, Delegate Howard, and I think Delegate Queen, if I got it right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Bob, for your passion. I guess my first question to you is, what are you afraid of? I see that there's a lot of passion about not studying something. And I've watched the testimony for the last 6 years where you and others in the Bankers Association have come and pled and desperately asked us not to study state banks. And I just wonder, everything that you've laid out in your testimony, everything that you just laid out here, all of the sort of bad scenarios of taxpayers ending up with a bill, which, by the way, we do when we bail out the Wall Street banks. all the time. So one might ask, should we bail out ourselves instead of Wall Street? But putting that aside for a second, everything that you lay out as a potentially negative outcome is a negative outcome of actually having a state bank. I haven't yet seen the negative outcome of asking questions and studying an issue. And so I guess my first question, I have a few others, but my first question is, what is it you're afraid of would happen if we studied this issue?
So, I'm not testifying out of fear, with all due respect, Delegate. I think it would be a tremendous waste of time and energy if that's the focus of this task force. You want to have a task force to talk about how we can facilitate small business lending in the state of Maryland, fine. But to have a task force that's going to look at should we have a state bank or not, a state bank that will be totally unregulated, a state bank that has no experience, whatsoever
My question is not
in
about
the
what
banking
state
business.
bank- but this bill is about a task force, and I just really want to hone in on that piece because I'm trying to understand what you're cautioning us against about studying the possibility of a state bank. And so it sounds like you're saying you're worried about us wasting our time. I mean, I thank you for that. I appreciate that. There are a number of things that, one could argue waste my time, but I'm just trying to see if there's something else that you're worried about or cautioning us against as we think about asking questions and studying a possibility.
Well, look, I'm a realist. I look at, we had, the Credit Union League, they want a state bank, right? The Consumer Rights Coalition, they want a state bank. This group wants a state bank, that group wants a state bank. They want to get into the banking business, and that's what this task force is going to study.
Are you
We
worried
think it's
that if we
unnecessary and unmerited. I'm sorry if you disagree.
You're worried that if we study this, we might conclude that we should have a state bank, or we might.
I think that it's not worth even studying, quite frankly.
Okay. My second question is, I just want to find out, you said that others have looked at this issue and that we've looked at the issue 6 other times and it's never advanced. Do you know how many times, for example, 100 years ago, the possibility of women voting came before legislators and was rejected before there was finally a decision to move forward with it?
No, I don't know.
Okay, my concern is that if we only ever say no to things, or if we say that the fact that things have been rejected in the past is a reason to say no to things, I'm not saying it's a reason to say yes to it. I'm just saying the fact that it's been rejected in the past, I'm concerned about that being a reason to not consider things in the future, because what that essentially says is we should never have progress. We should never make decisions that are different than the ones that we made in the past. The last thing I wanted to check in on is, you said that other states have studied it and not moved it forward. I think did California authorize municipal banks out of a study, I think a few years ago? Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I said state banks.
Yeah.
California authorized municipal banks, and not one single municipality in the state of California has formed a bank. Not one.
In 2 years. It doesn't mean it was a
Not
bad
one.
idea, just
Not one. Not one.
not yet. In 2 years. So I guess the question is, it seems to me that if we study it, we could come to the same conclusion you have right now. We could come to the conclusion that there's not the funds to capitalize a bank, that it's too risky, that it's preferable to bail out Wall Street banks than to invest in our own bank. We could come to all of those potential outcomes, or we could decide to move forward with municipal banks or state banks, where any of those are possible outcomes. And I guess I just, I don't know, there's not really a question in that. It's hard for me to understand why you feel so passionately about not allowing us or not having us ask a series of questions. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
I believe Delegate Howard and then Delegate Queen was the order.
Delegate Queen was before me, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Queen, then Delegate Howard.
Well, thank you, Delegate Howard. I was willing to wait, no problem. So my question, I guess, is around the study, right? So Bob, you've mentioned, and I agree with you, we have a very robust banking system here in Maryland. And one of the reasons why we didn't agree to have the the federal, the credit unions take federal funds is because we didn't have the data that supported it. We didn't have the benefit of the study. And so we have this great banking system in Maryland, but yet we have banking deserts. Yet we have lending that's disproportionate amongst people of color. We have issues where small businesses aren't getting the support they need. We have this great banking system in Maryland, but the CRA, as was mentioned, Ms. White mentioned, we aren't meeting all those goals. We have problems. So there seems to be some issue. I don't know what it is, but certainly doing the study might help us. Now, do we need to change that study to make sure we look at the idea of a state bank with regards to addressing these deficiencies? Maybe that needs to be the amendment, but saying not doing a study, I'm not even understanding the rationale for that. Why not the study? Why not give us data that tells us that the banking system that we have, with the federal banking systems we have, is the best that Marylanders should have? Why not give me that data?
I would just say this, Delegate Queen, and I very much appreciate and respect your point of view on these issues. I think that what gives us pause is that what you heard from the proponents and what you see in the title of the bill, what you can see in the bill as far as the members of the task force and who's designated, is that it's a study which is designed to end up saying that, yes, we should have a state bank. And, we don't have any problem, and I'd be happy to meet with you and every member of the committee if you want to schedule a briefing and have us come in and talk about what our banks are doing as far as business lending, what we're doing in communities, how many of our banks and what they're, how they rate in the Community Reinvestment Act, all of these things. I think they're all viable discussions, and I know the Senate, based on the report that they've issued, has looked at these issues, and we're happy to meet, and discuss them. We just don't think that a, quote, Maryland State Bank Task Force is necessary.
Okay, so I think we need to maybe reword what this bill should do, but I think we need the data. I mean, it'd be great for you all to come talk to us and tell us what you have, but I can go to the neighborhoods and see what we have.
I would be more than happy.
I can go to Baltimore and see there are deserts.
Be more than happy to
so
sit
your
down
data
with you.
doesn't help me with what my eyes tell me.
Okay. We'd be more than happy to sit down with you and any other member of the committee and talk about, what should be studied. And but this bill, as it's been introduced, we just find it's all tilted. It's all tilted and intended to go one way.
Okay, well, I appreciate
I'm just being frank and honest. That's how we see it.
And I am too. And I'm looking to be balanced, and I appreciate your opinion.
All right, very good.
We're in mid-session form, I see. Delegate Howard.
Yeah, I think Delegate Queen's right. And I think Bob's right. I think that this is a broad approach to problems that we face in Maryland, and I appreciate Bob wanting to come forward and look at more scalpel-like solutions to some of those problems. Bob, do you share my concern that ultimately this will take government out of the role? I've always seen government as sort of a referee, okay? Like you have a football field, there's small business, there's big business, there's state banks, federal banks, whatever. And government's sort of that referee. My concern is, and I want to know if you share this concern, that is, and because I think you're right, I think this study ultimately leads to exactly what you stated, is that we start to take, the government starts to take the role as a player and not the referee. Do you share that concern?
Yes,
and
absolutely.
I figured, and we sort of saw that with the financial crisis of 2008, and we saw hundreds of thousands of people occupy Wall Street. So I think that ultimately we would see hundreds of thousands of people or tens of thousands of people occupy Lawyers Mall. So I think that I'm glad we share that concern. And I guess really that was my question. And, I want you to get back with Delegate Queen on some solutions and all of us, quite frankly. So.
be happy to and continue to discuss it.
Because, we all see it. We all see it. We know. So.
Yeah, there's no industry anywhere that's as heavily regulated as the banking industry. And notwithstanding, even with that, we have, there have been problems. But we are heavily, heavily regulated. And there's a reason for that. We take the public's money, we hold it, and then we lend it out. And to put the state in that business or a municipality in that business, we think is very risky.
I mean, well, I'm save the diatribe, but thank you.
Thank you.
Any other hands? Did I miss anyone?
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, Delegate Crosby.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hey, Bob, just real quick, what if we put intent into the bill that if we find and conclude that a state bank should exist, that it's going to be regulated the exact same as every other bank?
Well, look,
I mean,
I don't think it's quite that simple, Delegate Crosby. What we do is we take deposits. We take deposits from businesses. We take deposits from individuals. That's all heavily regulated. And then when we lend it out, it's all heavily regulated. If you're going to say that the state is going to be regulated in exactly the same fashion as an FDIC insured bank, a bank that's subject to the regulations of the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, I mean, you're talking about putting somebody into the banking business that's not a bank, that's never been a bank. And it's going to be, it just seems to us that once again, I would say to you, in your business, you want to have the state opening up an office that's going to compete with your office tomorrow. I mean, I'll be honest.
It makes sense for taxpayers, then, in the end, I'm in a public policy position. So, I mean, if it's
I hear you. I don't think that would solve the problem.
I also think it's a little bit disingenuous, when 80% of Maryland government funds are held on Wall Street, and is that what is really best for Maryland citizens? I think it's something. I think I remember that from the last testimony. It was Delegate Hornberger's bill that would have put government or allowed government funds to be in credit unions, right? So, that was also another policy question that we were debating then. So, I don't understand. I mean, ultimately, you're saying you're taking taxpayer dollars and reinvesting them, but you're also paying shareholders in that process as well. And many times they live in New York, not here in Maryland.
And I would tell you that the one thing that we're doing, that the credit unions and no one else who's testified in favor of this bill is doing, is paying taxes to the federal government and paying taxes to the state of Maryland, okay? Millions and millions and millions of dollars in tax revenue. Yet they want to come in and compete with us and never pay a penny in taxes.
Yeah, but they're not for profit.
But they compete with us. So let's have non-for-profit liquor stores. Let's have non-for-profit, department stores. Let's have non-for-profit everything.
Okay. I think it's just a fundamental. In the end, I mean, I'm kind of with Delegate Queen of what is the harm in actually doing this and finding out if we should go forward or not go forward. But
well, once again, you got to look at you have to look at the task force and look at what's in the bill and what the purpose of it is. And I think the purpose of it is very clear from the proponents, and that's they want to have a state bank. Period.
Guys, let me do this because I think we sort of dipping into debating the bill at this point and not necessarily just asking the questions. So let me move to the next one. If there are no additional ones, we probably should go to Mindy Lehman now, if I haven't missed someone already.
I don't think so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And Mr. Enton's testimony did an excellent job of covering the Maryland Bankers Association's position on this bill, which is the creation of a task force to study a state bank. You do have a written testimony which highlights studies that have been done in some other states and what they predict to be the resulting costs and concerns about a state bank. One of the things I did want to highlight in our written testimony, which is in addition to talking about the very competitive and robust financial services industry that exists in Maryland today, which includes 83 banks and many, many credit unions, close to 100, as well as community development financial institutions, an array of other financial providers. In addition, there are bankers' banks that help provide some of the needs that are outlined in this study. So we don't believe the study is needed. That said, a number of issues are raised in the bill, such as capital support for small businesses and support for individuals and their individual financial needs. And we are always happy to come to the table and discuss those things. Maryland banks have been front and center during this entire pandemic, and we have made over 80,000 Paycheck Protection Program loans within the bank. That's worth about $10 billion. We've been front and center with helping those economic stimulus payments get into the hands of Marylanders who very, very much need that assistance. We have also been very engaged with doing loan modifications and refinances and forbearance, not just on the small business and business side of things, but also mortgages. And that support is not stopping. We're already in conversations with our congressional delegation about the next round of the PPP program, which is rolling out literally as I speak. Our bankers are working with their business customers to give them that much needed support. And we're already looking to the third round of that. So the support from the banking industry is here. It is absolute. And we're happy to partner with this committee, the bill sponsor, on the issues that you have raised. But we do not support the creation of a state bank. Thank you.
Chair. This is Chris Adams, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Adams.
Thank you, Chair. So, Mindy, I suppose my question is, how are you regulated? It's federal and it's state, but it is significant. You have auditors that come into your banks on a regular basis and are auditing the quality of the decisions that the banks are making. Could you just in brief, 30 seconds, maybe a minute, describe for the committee the nature of these audits and how thorough they are?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that summary. And you've in your question covered a lot of ground. And banks are regulated both at the state level and the federal. These are very robust examination process where you have teams of examiners coming in and going through the bank books. They do that on a regular basis. We are subject to the Consumer Reinvestment Act, which was talked about earlier today. And just to clarify a comment that Ms. White made about the satisfactory ratings, I believe the percentage she gave was 90% satisfactory. That satisfactory rating is the absolute highest you can get. That's for some reason the word they give it. It's not outstanding. They call it satisfactory. So hopefully that gives a little more color to your question. And there are sizable penalties and enforcement actions should a bank not be doing something with dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's and complying with the very robust array of regulations. And appropriately so, we are taking care of people's money and their finances. So we're not opposed at all to the very robust regulation that we have. It's something that we make sure that we comply with. And thank you for the question.
So the follow-up to that is that banks are a trust fiduciary of my money when I invest it, when I deposit it, when I borrow money from the bank. And so that trust position is balanced against the quality of the lending decisions that you make and how you treat the money when you have it. Is that not the case?
Yes, sir. So banks are required to operate in a safe and sound manner, just as you described. So it's balancing the lending activities with the safety and soundness of the bank overall, and then of course its depositors' finances.
And of course, government is in a perfect spot to issue grants, make opportunities available for citizens that who need that sort of help. I would imagine that this have the ability to make a political statement, a progressive statement that we need services where they don't currently exist. Here's where I part ways with the rationale behind this bill, which is if we're going to rationalize the state running a bank, what's going to stop them from saying the state's going to run a grocery store? What's going to stop them from saying the state's going to run general contractors so we can save money from construction? At what point, when you start saying yes to these sort of programs, you end up saying yes to pretty much everything else that relates to what is currently being provided in the private sector?
I don't know.
Well, and let me just say to you, I do know, and it's a problem. I'm worried for these kind of bills coming forward, the rationale for these being brought, and why we think the government is in a better spot than the private sector to do what needs to be done in the communities that we serve. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Anyone else for Ms. Lehman?
Mr. Chair.
Delegate Rogers and Delegate Mounts.
So, Mr. Chair, I have a question, and I'll preface it with a comment. I know that Bob is a real big basketball fan, and I'm sure that he's very familiar with Allen Iverson. And so my question is, we're talking about a study, not a bank, right? A study.
Yes, the bill outlines a study for a state bank, the creation of a state bank.
But at this point, it's a study, not the bank, a study.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Mounts.
Thank you, Chairman. Mindy, good to see you. And it's been real interesting. And, for listening to the testimony about, the study is addressing a problem, and especially the consequences of COVID. I know on the shore in my district, our community banks have really done an incredible job stepping up. There's Shore United, Providence State Bank, Hebron Bank, and I'm missing some others. Those are some of the big ones. But clearly, there is a pointed interest in a problem. And I was wondering perhaps if the language in this proposed task force, the way it's put together, it's raised flags from the banking side. And I was wondering, and I'm sure you can probably infer the problems that are being raised. I mean, is there language that you could propose or maybe work on that would better get to the problem and less get to the conflict, to try to drive this task force or this question that's being proposed? What language would be a better way to approach the problem that was raised? So would you be able to provide some suggestions?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Delegate Motz, and I'll definitely let our Eastern Shore bankers know of your comments. They will appreciate that, and they have certainly been working very hard and diligently. To your question, is there language that we could propose? And I don't know that we need a bill to study these things and have these discussions. I don't know. I think it was mentioned earlier in this very bill hearing that we don't need a bill to study and talk about things. And we're very open to these conversations about the individual banking needs as well as business needs. And it's interesting when you get to the conversation about capital and businesses and small businesses, there's a lot that goes into that. You hear the word capital and you might be thinking loan, but what a business needs not necessarily is always another loan. They might be looking for a grant or some other kind of support that doesn't necessarily have to be repaid. And we're front and center with those conversations currently, and look forward to continuing to do so. We're actively engaged at the local level, at the state level, with an array of partners. It really does take a network to support small businesses from startup in different industries through becoming a full-blown and seasoned business. And we look forward to continuing that good work, and would be happy to partner with you and anything that you would like to talk about on the Eastern Shore or more broadly in the state.
What if the task force also focused on bringing private banks into certain areas? What's needed to bring private banks into areas that feel that the banking services aren't available, things like that. I get the argument, state bank versus private bank and the role of government and where government should be. And this has been a crazy year for me personally. I just think of this task force, if it's moving and there's a push for it, then maybe there's an incentive that the state could do to bring private banking into areas where private banking doesn't already exist, rather than, if they allow these municipal banks in California, and California hadn't done it yet, and I get it, 2 years isn't a long time, but California is pretty quick to do some of these things. And I would have thought if it was a good idea in California, they'd already have it up, even though it's been 2 years. So obviously there's some problems with the government, doing things. And personally, I've had a heck of a year with government programs not working and the time it takes to get back. And I have real problems with a state bank, but at the same time, I wouldn't look the other way and say, hey, there aren't problems that need to be addressed. And so I would just recommend or suggest you to think on it and maybe come up. Concerns.
Is it me? Oh, okay.
Also. Thank you.
I thought we had froze up for a second. Anyone else from Ms. Lehman? If not, our final witness, if I've found us in order, is Adriana Butts.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Anna Butts is a member of MBA's team, and she submitted our written testimony. She's not testifying verbally today.
Okay. Well, that appears to conclude our witness list. I don't think I've missed anyone that signed up. And with that, I'd like to thank the members today. I'd like to thank our witnesses for participating, and I want to tell everyone have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Holla.
Thank you. Let me get out of this. Leave.